I'm Ava,
And I'm Isa. We're writers and fans.
and this is Unpacking the Plot.
Hello. Hi. This is another episode. Welcome. We are doing more Umbrella Academy today, but since our last episode, I want to know, Ava, I'm putting you on the spot. What have you been doing? I need to know.
Been pretty busy, so haven't had a whole lot of free time, but I finished Fire Country and I started watching SEAL Team, which is really great for me because it has this perfect balance of keeping me interested, but not keeping me so interested that I can't go about doing other things. And I'm laughing at the fact that Christy Swanson was in it on screen with David Boreanaz. So we had another iteration of Buffy and Angel on screen together. Thought that was great.
My favorite Buffy and Angel scenes are when they're in their own separate shows, living their own separate lives.
It was just funny because I was sitting there watching it and I was like, man, she looks familiar and her voice sounds familiar too. And then I was like, that's OG Buffy from the movie.
I gotta watch that sometime.
I was like, I gotta send this to Issa. And so I took a picture of it and was like, look, it's Buffy and Angel.
I've been reading. That's what I've been doing. Audiobooks mostly. I was like audiobooks, and then I'm reading House of X, Powers of X with my Marvel Unlimited subscription. So, but yeah, this episode is all about the Umbrella Academy. We're diving into season two. And if you haven't listened to our episode on season one, please do. Or if you're just interested in season two, like whatever, we can't control you.
This isn't The Sims.
So, when it comes to season two, the comic books of the Umbrella Academy diverge a lot. It takes from it, especially volume two, but it very much does its own thing. Volume two is called Dallas, and so coming into season two, I was expecting the whole Kennedy assassination thing. And that whole concept is not a surprise, knowing what I know about the author. Like literally in the back of the book, it's like a photo shoot with him and his wife pretending to be Jackie and JFK on the day of his assassination. It's like, yeah, you guys are really into it. But now we're gonna dive into season two.
Yay.
We left season one with Seven sending a bolt of light into the moon and it's crashing down to Earth in different little pieces. And Five uses his time traveling powers to send them to the past, and they're all separated. So the plot overall kind of goes the siblings are separated, Five sees the apocalypse again. It's a Russian nuclear war this time. And then the siblings eventually reunite because everyone's dealing with their own shit. And they go to stop the apocalypse. They go back to the present, and they were being chased by time assassins the entire time. Five specifically.
Oh, I forgot about the Swedes.
Olga for Olga.
I feel like they were definitely chasing all of them.
Well, then they had to protect Seven because they got one of those little messages and it was like, protect Seven.
Yeah. I really liked how they got separated and they were in different times. And I like how they all trickled back into each other's lives. It was so organic, for lack of a better word. Just the way that we see Allison's husband gets locked up and she goes to visit him, and the guy in the cell holds up his hands and it has Klaus's tattoos, hello and goodbye. And she's like, where did you get that? And he was like, all of the prophet's children have them. And she was like, and who is this prophet? And then she goes and finds Klaus, who went and started a cult.
Can I talk really quick about? I just love that character design of being like, yeah, he talks to the dead and he has the Ouija board, hello and goodbye on his hands. I'm like, I love that. I was gonna lose my mind if we didn't reunite everyone soon enough. So I was glad that they weren't just passing each other by and we got moments where they linked back and found each other. Though the pacing this season, I felt like there were a lot of lulls, but it mostly paid off by the end.
I did think that the character interactions were a lot better in this season than
Yeah.
in the previous season. And I thought it was interesting to see all of the siblings interacting. And another level on top of that was the fact that Seven had this form of amnesia and couldn't remember anything, and then slowly coming back into the family fold.
Yeah, I did really enjoy having so many character moments this season. And I remember being so excited to get character moments in season one and really flesh everyone out. And then by season two, it was no more sitting. It was lounging. It was like the stakes are higher than ever, guys. Get up, let's go. Come on. This is worse than before.
I really liked the new characters we got introduced to in season two as well. I really liked Elliot and I really liked Lila. Lila is one of my favorite characters, but Elliot provided a lot of like comedic relief in there. I really liked the way that they incorporated new characters into the dynamic and how it really kind of shaped it. I think it helped a lot.
I'm always impressed when shows I like it when shows aren't afraid to add more to already such a big cast. Like you're still keeping them in a bubble if you don't introduce other characters, and you need to challenge them if you're going to make a story.
And that was kind of one of my issues with season one, is it did feel like they were in such a bubble.
Hmm.
Like we did have a couple of outside characters, but it was very minimal. You only had a couple of characters interacting with outside characters, namely Seven and Diego.
Really
And
quick to those listening, if you haven't listened to our first episode, we refer to the Vanya character as Seven because it is the same name in the show and the comic, just to those unaware.
and those are mainly the characters that interact with other characters. I mean, you see Allison on the phone, but there's not really any in-person interaction. So it was really nice this season to kind of have that world open up and kind of come into new characters and actually interacting with the environment and not just being in their bubble.
I was hoping that environment would have been in the present day of sorts, because I would have loved to see these characters go out into the wild, but more united than estranged.
It almost seemed like they were uncomfortable nailing down the exact setting of season one because it does exist in an alternate reality where there's no technology. And so it was almost like they didn't want to bridge that gap because, I mean, we see them go into a library, but we don't see much of the city as a whole.
It was an interesting choice to try to keep it in the 80s without it being in the 80s, because in the comic books, it's the 80s. In the show, they're like, no, 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 it's 2019.
I still maintain that it's because cell phones would have solved so many problems.
See, this is when you try to get a little creative with the writing, or just make everyone hate each other just that much to where, no, I'm not going to answer your phone. Ugh.
I don't have their phone number.
Yeah, they just don't have the number.
Yeah,
Oh, I don't recognize this phone number and I'm a millennial. I'm not going to answer it.
accurate. So I thought it was nice in season two. We got more external shots. We saw more of the political climate going on. We saw more of the world as a whole. So branching out into the different characters and where they're at, I guess we can start it off with five.
Yeah, so five arrives the latest of all the siblings because they're all separated between 1960 and 1963. And five, with, his fantastic luck, sees the apocalypse again and escapes just barely in order to go back just enough so he can reunite his siblings. And, the plot begins. Let's go.
I really liked when you see the scene of the apocalypse and it's the nuclear war, how you see the siblings come together and there's seven flying with them, like to join them and help them. And so you're immediately like, well, it's not seven this time, but also it felt very X-Men-y, and it's really funny because Elliot Page is also in X-Men.
Yeah. Klaus can also fly in the comics. I get why they don't do that, because, like, why would he be able to fly? But also, maybe he'll be able to fly later on, because it seems like we're getting deeper with all the powers this season. But it's also our first time seeing the Swedes, the assassins that come to try to kill Five and pretty much stop the siblings in general, because the commission's on their ass again, just all over again, and kind of not really letting that go. But in the comic books, Five is a really good killer, not because he's, trained and old and stuff, but because they put DNA of all the killers inside of him. And so that's why he's like really good.
You know,
I
that's,
see the face you're making.
that's
Like,
like another one of those, well, it's sci-fi. We can do whatever we want.
yeah,
We want him to have a little bit of all the serial killers ever? Bam! Pick your fantastical things.
just all of them,
Yeah.
all the things. And you know what? I don't
Your
entirely blame him.
Yes, but your magical world still needs to have rules.
Yeah.
the rules are the basis of any universe, and you can't understand that universe without understanding the rules. And that is true in fiction. And yes, you can break those rules, but you have to be able to see that. Otherwise, it's just this, for lack of a better term, mind fuck. You're just kind of like, where are we going next? What's going to happen? And I mean, that can be fun, but it can also be brain scrambling.
I mean, we got rules in the show when Five needs to interact with his older self, which is technically his younger self, because of all those weird little side effects that he gets when meeting. And that's not in the comics, but it's easy to wrap your head around. You're like, oh, like, yeah, of course, meeting with another version of yourself in a different timeline would have some weird side effects.
Yeah, I did like that. I feel like Five's plot line in the season was a little stagnant compared to some of the other siblings.
Yeah, he had the same goal as he did in the first season of I Need to Stop the Apocalypse, and I was personally very excited to see a season without him dealing with the apocalypse because that's been his whole life. He was 13 years old, he got transported into the future, saw the apocalypse, his brain was just dead set on fixing this. And then right when they're trying to solve the apocalypse at the end of season one, he's thrown into a new one. That's just his life. And I was ready to see a fish out of water kind of scenario for Five, but we didn't get that.
Yeah, I did really like the interactions with the character Elliot, how Five kind of picked up on him surveying the site where each sibling, because when each sibling got dropped off at the certain point between 1960 and 1963, they were all dropped off at the same place. And so this character, Elliot, had been keeping surveillance on that point to kind of track the comings and goings of these supernatural entities that he had seen come through a time portal, essentially.
He thought they were aliens.
Yeah, I thought that he was a really fun add to it.
Elliot got along pretty well with all the siblings when they came in.
Yeah. Elliot's scene with Luther was really great when they were using the laughing gas.
Yeah.
I liked the, how do you have all this stuff? My dad was a dentist. I inherited the building from him, and then they just like cackle. It was great.
Apparently that was common in the 60s. Like people were using laughing gas a lot.
I mean, people are always gonna find drugs.
Yeah, and that was a time notorious for them.
Yeah.
I did like the consistency of Five being referred to as an old timer, even by his own dad, when they, find him in the 60s and they have like a serious, like, man conversation. We're adults here. All these other, like, 30-year-old children shouldn't discuss with us.
I feel like Five is Reginald's favorite.
You know what? He probably was his favorite even before he knew him grown up
Yeah,
because he has that portrait.
right. And there's nothing, there's a statue of Ben, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, I get why they're there is because Ben died and Five vanished.
I don't know. It's just something about watching the interactions between Five and Reginald. Their personalities seem to mesh well together in the pragmatism, whereas the rest of the kids kind of seem like they're looking for affection. Five is very pragmatic, very, nope, this is how it's going to be. I don't need that. At least what we see of him. We don't see Five as a younger child. He's very pragmatic when we see him, even at 13 when he leaves home. He does have that teenage, I know better than you, and I'm going to do this whether you want me to do it or not.
Yeah.
I would be curious to know if he was always like that.
I did end up really liking the advice that Reginald gave Five about, wait, why are you even time traveling like years and decades all the time? Just go seconds or minutes.
Yeah.
Like just do that. And then at the end or towards the end, Five uses that and it all works out.
With season one and the apocalypse, he didn't have to bring them all the way back to the 60s. He could
Yeah.
have brought them back like 5 days.
Yeah.
That's his
Let's
name.
get Leonard away from Seven. Leonard. That is his
Leonard.
name. And
Yeah.
let's all go to Seven's concert.
Yeah. Let's surround them with
Hooray!
support and love.
Apocalypse averted.
Story over. No future seasons.
Imagine that's how the show ends. It's just, oh, wait, I could have just done this.
Yeah.
I would feel slighted.
I hate when stuff does that, like, oh, just kidding, it was all a dream.
hmm You have to have like a super deep message or something to make that work.
Yeah.
Like it has to be some sort of big theme or something like that. Otherwise, it's like you wasted my time, which is most of the time for those kinds of stories.
Yeah.
Five also goes straight to searching for his other siblings, and I think it's Diego who he finds first, right?
Yeah, he finds Diego pretty quickly.
Yeah. Oh, best line. I was already thinking this from the first season, and we literally said it in our last episode of five being like, think Batman, then aim lower.
Yeah, I have that line written down too. I
About
that.
Diego.
Yeah. And the fact that we open up on Diego in a mental institution because he is ranting and raving about somebody trying to assassinate the president.
Dude, I am not surprised he's that kind of person at all. Like I
I
was like,
know.
oh man, I bet you he was the kind of kid who was like, oh, like the conspiracies and the this and the that, and then the dad's the umbrella man. Like his
Yeah.
brain was like short-circuiting.
The funny thing is that instead of like keeping cool and, going there and trying to prevent it and doing all of this, he went and told everybody and he still talks about it when he is locked up.
Wouldn't that make you more suspicious? Like the president's dying person who is saying the president is going to be assassinated? Are are you going to maybe do a thing that we shouldn't say because there have been people who've been arrested for just saying this?
Right? Yeah. And so I was just like, my door's gonna get broken down by SWAT. But yeah, the fact that he got himself locked up is hilarious. But then he still can't stop. He's on this hero rampage of somebody needs to listen to me. And people are just like, you're crazy, dude.
And even at the end, when it's like, oh, hold on, I think we stopped the apocalypse. Like, Seven's not gonna blow up because these idiots put them on acid and apocalypse averted. And Diego's like, I can still save Kennedy.
Yeah.
Just like taking off to the lawn, like up the grassy knoll.
Yeah. Very, very hyper fixated on that.
He knows the apocalypse would happen when JFK is saved, right?
It was kind of
And
giving, don't fuck with history.
yeah, and Diego's still like, but he's a good person and we're heroes and we have to go save him. And it's like, but the world, but the world, there's a whole world. It's one of those decisions.
Which is interesting. But yeah, Diego had some funny moments. I especially liked his interaction with Lila, who is another new character that we got this season, who is actually one of my favorite characters.
Lila for me was interesting at first and then hard to warm up to towards the middle. And then the end, I was like, oh. I think my problem with Lila was she was so tied to the handler. The handler is the commission leader-ish, but then she got demoted and then promoted, and Lila is basically her surrogate kid. There was so much like just tying them together and spending so much time on them, and it was like I don't really need this right now. I like the connection, but if we're gonna have the connection, it was a lot. I didn't want to feel sour towards Lila, but Handler was souring it.
I think that was meant to make it mean more when she chose Diego. I think that was kind of the iteration behind that, but there was so much handler content.
I
But
would have liked the point you made. I would have felt that more, the weight of her choosing Diego and all the Hargreaves siblings over Handler if Handler wasn't such a black and white villain this season. Like, duh, yeah, don't do it.
there was so much more room to make the handler a more faceted character with her relationship with Lila, but they really didn't do that. But I really
Yeah.
loved Lila's power reveal and how they did that
Yeah.
during that battle scene where Seven sets off that energy pulse and it blows back all of the time assassins, but the handler and Lila are safe inside this bubble. And they're just like, what? And then boom, Lila has powers. And they're just, I love the reveals, and I felt like that one was good. It's great.
Yeah, it in that moment that reveal happened, everything just made a lot more sense. Again, I would have liked it a lot more if there was more nuance, like you said, of Handler as a character. But yeah, I think it worked out a lot better when it came to Lila's character. When you see that, you're like, oh, that's why you're here.
Yeah.
Great. One moment with Lila, I really liked when the siblings are all fighting her, and she max 5 with this frying pan and his head goes I was like, oh, that really got me.
One thing I would have liked to have seen a little bit more with a character like Lila is so Lila's power is the ability to mimic somebody else's power. I would have liked to have seen more an adjustment period. Like you get a new power, especially one like Sevens. That's going to take a minute to figure out how to use it. And like I feel like that is one of those things where you see a lot with characters who are able to mimic the powers automatically having this grasp concept of it.
Yeah, there's some characters where they add all these extra layers and it makes sense, but most don't. Like Rogue in X-Men, for example, she literally is absorbing that person and their memories. But even she has an adjustment period.
Yeah.
So you can know everything in your head, but still not have the proper skills.
Yeah.
Lila has none of that. I did enjoy Diego being fed up with her 1 second and then like they were acting like a married couple without being married.
Yeah, they were great. It was like a you're crazy, I'm crazy, let's be crazy together. Almost like understanding of each other on like a molecular level.
I mean, they are they are molecularly understanding of each other technically because
Yes, but
well,
Lila,
he doesn't want to have sex with his other siblings.
yeah. They didn't grow up as siblings. So if there
Look,
does end up being a connection based on the sperm donor, that is one thing, but the growing up as siblings is what throws me for Allison and Luther.
I think the biological thing is like looking like people. So like each other. Like if they look like each other, it makes you like not want to associate. That's why you don't want to be with your siblings. But they don't. And their parents, you can hardly call them parents. It's like being raised in an orphanage. So I'll be the
Basically.
devil's advocate there of like, is it weird? Yeah, I do think it's weird, but like it's a little leeway.
I thought you were talking about Lila for a minute there, and I was like, Lila had parents.
Yeah, they kept the baby. I appreciate that. His wife got an immaculate conception and he just dealt with it.
I mean, depending on where you're at in life, you might not even know that it was, well, actually, no, you would because it was an immaculate birth. It wasn't like a pregnancy. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just immediate. Yeah,
They
I wasn't.
probably, because I mean, if you think about it, and if somebody was like really religious, they could see that as like the answer to their prayers.
Yeah, I feel like there are plenty of people like that. And then plenty of people who did not want kids ever and their abs are just permanently separated.
Yeah.
So something about Diego that I liked that they fleshed out was that he was more tied into his dad than I thought he was. Because in the first season, he seems more, I'm just gonna make my past matter. And also, I love my mom. And then in this second season, it was like, I really have to say JFK. I have daddy issues and mommy issues.
Do you think that he was actually tied into the father, or do you think it was more the fact that he saw a picture of the father on the grassy knoll?
Well, there was that whole little knife fight that they had, and he shanked him, and all those lines and parallels that they had of like Lila is even talking to him in the insane asylum of like, oh, you haven't pleased your dad yet, like you haven't made him happy, and that seems to be kind of his arc. But then we learn later it's not just about his dad, even though it really is. It's also his mom because he meets Grace, like she was an actual person. I thought that was super cool.
I want to know more about what happened to Grace. That was a little ambiguous, but they were raising Pogo together.
The chimp that would be the butler that Seven impaled in the
Um,
show and blew the brain up in the comic.
I'm assuming she left him because of his involvement in JFK. Why did we make a robot?
I guess if he was gonna model a mother after anyone, it would be her, but it's still kind of creepy.
What's weirder is that what about the woman from season one? Why did he model the robot after his love interest from season two and not his love interest from season one?
Oh yeah, the woman that's dying on the bed at the end of the season.
Hmm. I thought that
That
that was kind of curious. Like, he goes through all of this, that violin meant something, but yet he chose to make the robot look like Grace.
Yeah, the violin that he gives Seven, which I'm still so I want to know more of Hargreaves' opinions towards his kids, and I really did enjoy them all hanging out and talking to Hargreaves when they all decided to meet him. I like to think that he met all of them and was like, I am gonna be certain. I'm gonna be absolutely certain and sure that I do not take these children. I'm gonna take different children. Like he was like I was when he was meeting them, I was like, he does not want these people. He does not want to raise them. He was like, no. This kid threw a knife the second I asked about the powers that they have.
We're
And I
running
told him
out of.
he missed because he's a little bitch. That's basically how he treated Diego.
I liked the scene where they all confront him and they're like, "Where are your children?" And he's like, "I don't want children."
Yeah, because they make a point to say that he hates them. Children.
Yeah.
But then he raises Pogo, and Pogo has like this cute little drawing of everyone, of him and Grace and Hargreaves, and it's so cute
Yeah.
because Pogo is
And it's
gained sentience, like he's basically a human because that's how he is in season one, but he's just like an old man, but a chimp.
yeah.
The most distanced of all the siblings is Seven. Like they're all separated, but Seven's out in the middle of nowhere with amnesia.
Well, I feel like the amnesia thing was kind of necessary because how do you start to unpack everything that happened to Seven in season one?
Yeah. Yeah, they do something similar in the comics where Seven doesn't have quite a good of memory because they get shot, and that's how they stop Seven. And so they got brain damage. But in the show, they pop out of that portal, run into the street, get hit by a car, and amnesia.
I feel like the amnesia came from the overuse of their powers. Could also at some point be like intentional, not intentional, but like subconscious. Push this trauma down.
I do that.
Doesn't everybody? People be like, "Don't you remember?" Nope.
Yeah.
But yeah, Seven's plot line was interesting how, first of all, who hits somebody with their car and then's like, "Come live with us." It was just a very strange situation. So Seven went to live with a family on a farm. You have the dad.
He like starts off not great, but then he just kind of becomes more black and white as the show goes on, which is like, okay, I guess he's a bad guy now.
Yeah. And then Sissy and Harlan. So Sissy is the wife and Harlan is the, what, like 8-year-old child?
Yeah, he looks about 8.
Yeah. Seven kind of adopts the nanny role in the family and really connects to Harlan, who seems to have some type of neurodivergence,
He's
which,
nonverbal.
yeah, which in the 60s, I mean, that's a whole nother situation. But Seven and Harlan really connect and kind of relieve this pressure in the family. And so Seven kind of becomes part of this family and then has this whole love affair with Sissy.
Right towards the beginning, I could already tell that there was going to be a Seven and Sissy thing. Like they set that up pretty well, pretty obviously, which is good. I mean, not too obviously, just like, like the tells were there.
You could tell that that was going to be the love interest.
Yeah. And it helped Seven understand themselves as a person because they didn't have all that trauma before. So it was just them, just
Yeah.
who they are. But then there's the question, like, do your memories make you who you are? But then later, Seven does remember everything. And the peace that they were able to get in the few months they've been in 1963 with Sissy and Harlan and the farm, they were able to, I don't know, come to terms with it almost when they did get their memories back.
Well, I feel like the main thing for me that sticks out the most about Seven is that their powers are linked to their emotions. So I feel like they were medicated their entire life to not feel emotion.
Right.
Coming into your emotions while struggling with a power was kind of overwhelming in season one. And then in season two, they're in more of a safe place and can kind of, it's calmer. Like, yeah, there's romantic feelings involved, but they bloom slowly. I feel like that calm really helped Seven and the day to day and all of that. I did really like their love story. I felt like it was, I mean, the struggles of trying to be in a gay relationship in that time period. You can't openly be in that type of a relationship during that time period. It was not just frowned upon, it would put you in danger.
Even with the time period, though, I feel like Sissy was a little too fickle for my liking. Some decision needed to be made, and it didn't really come to be until Harlan was involved, which makes sense because it's her son. But her fickleness was a little frustrating because one second she's like, I wish my husband paid attention to me. And then it was like, oh no, never mind. And then it was like, do you want to be with Seven or do you not? I don't know. They live in the middle of nowhere.
They do live in the middle of nowhere, but she has a husband.
She could have escaped with Seven and brought Harlan.
But then that
And
adds to the question, where would they go? Like they can't just get jobs and
oh, it was more about the danger.
yeah. And Harlan needs a certain level of stability. I do see what you mean, but I think that the struggle for Sissy to leave her life made sense to me because there weren't a lot of options back
E
then.
Even after her husband was killed and she had an option right in front of her. I understand being like, danger is going to follow us everywhere because we just had this massive climactic battle in my farm. And it seems like you deal with this a lot. And if it's going to keep following us around, I want nothing to do with it.
Well, I mean, you have to think of it also in terms of it's not just like jumping, what, 60 years into the future? That's a mind-boggling thing to think about. And when you're caring for a child that has special needs and trying to imagine what that drastic change would look like for him, especially when he's already lost his father and his home, and kind of compounding all that together and how it would impact him and his development and how far it would set him back. I think at a certain point it was used as a plot device in order to further the storyline and kind of cut the relationship off and not bring it into another season. But I don't completely not see where she could be coming from.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I guess when I see a love story in any sort of media like this, I would think there would be a little more show for commitment, but I think the whole point was that Sissy wanted to find herself just as much as Seven did.
Also, it kind of boils down to she did make a choice. She chose her son. It's kind of like the Hunger Games conversation where everybody was talking about Katniss, Peeta, and Gale, but Katniss chose Prim.
Yeah.
Katniss loved her sister. She put that above everything else. And Sissy made that decision for her son. She put her son above everything else.
Though Katniss was less fickle than Sissy.
Agreed. But I kind of think that that was the path that they were trying to put her character on in terms of that. But realistically, I feel like the choice was made because they didn't want to carry the character.
Right.
And I mean, that could stand to not be true. Who knows if they're going to pop up in a later episode. But it just kind of seemed like they were trying to, because the show seems very, a season finishes a plot point. We don't carry much plot over into another season. There's like little things, kind of the same that I said about Bridgerton. They kind of hold back what they carry on to a next season.
How did you feel about like the lore building with Seven giving Harlan mouth to mouth after they save him from drowning and light goes into him?
Until you said that, I did not realize that the light that went into Harlan resembles the light that Reggie released at the end of the first season.
Yeah, the little light sperms that go to Earth.
Yeah. I did think it was interesting that Seven's powers come across as blue, but the light was gold.
The same as the end of season one with that jar.
Yeah, I did think that that was interesting. Harlan gave me the end of season two, Harlan in the backseat of the car. That scene gave me villain origin stories vibes.
Oh yeah, him with the little wooden sparrow.
Yeah,
I was
that
like, what does that mean? Because I already knew about the whole Sparrow Academy stuff from the comic book, so I was like, interesting,
yeah.
interesting, before we get to the, literal end of it.
Yeah, I don't know. Something about that scene, the look on his face, the toy floating, I was just like, ooh.
I thought it was interesting seeing both Seven and Harlan connected when Seven was on acid because the government did that. They would just give people acid and interrogate them, just having no clue that acid was the worst drug you could probably give someone for that. And and I was watching that like, you're so dumb. I mean, they didn't know any better for so many reasons, but like it was more like you don't know what you're in for. This is not only the worst thing you could give someone to interrogate them, but the worst thing you could give this person.
This person of all people.
Yeah. Yeah.
I loved how it was Ben to save the day.
I like that too. Gave him a hug. I really like how so early in the season the whole Luther Seven thing is addressed after the events of what happened in season one because he goes to Seven Seven is like, oh my God, you're my family. I've been trying to search for my family this whole time. Like, who are you, giant white man? And and he goes to Seven and is like, he's just there to put his past behind him. No intention of saying how they got to know each other. He's just getting some closure for them both, really. I think it helps Seven in that moment, even though Seven has no idea what was happening exactly, because Seven doesn't really get their memories back till after the acid trip towards the end of season two, which was supposed to start the apocalypse all over again, but then they stopped it, and then Harlan got the powers and was like, oh no, this might start the apocalypse. And it was fine. Everything worked out, and they just time traveled back to their time. But back to Luther and Seven. Ava, how did you feel about that scene?
I really liked it. And I liked how they kept the audience not necessarily knowing what was going to happen because it kind of seemed like Luther was on a mission to finish what he had started. He gets there and Seven, I think, said something along the lines of, "What did I do to you?" And he was like, "No." And then Seven was like, "What did you do to me?" I liked how he owned up to that and kind of saw that he was so focused on the mission that he forgot to think about Seven as his sibling and really put that into perspective. And I liked how they had that moment.
Yeah, he seemed really wary when approaching Seven because he had like a gun ready because Seven was really volatile in that first season and he was ready to go. But then he sees that Seven genuinely doesn't remember. And so he's able to get this off his chest. And it was a nice moment. It's weird how the amnesia was so healing for Seven.
Another important thing to factor in with Seven and their reactions is that they had been medicated from the time that they were 4 years old. Years with being medicated and the way that their brain chemistry working with this medication. And then in season one, they're not weaned off that medication. They're forcibly removed from the medication. And so all of these feelings, their brain chemistry is changing because the medication's not there anymore. And that kind of created this surge in terms of how volatile they were. And I think traveling to the past, having that amnesia, being able to let that brain chemistry settle without all of the emotional turmoil happening helped create a new baseline where they were able to kind of refocus and handle their powers and the emergence of their powers better.
That makes sense to me. And I
Yeah.
think they handled it. Is it far-fetched to say they reasonably handled that?
Well, there's a reason that they say to wean yourself off of medication.
Okay.
And Seven didn't have that opportunity. Their medication was taken by Leonard. Their emotions are numbed. Like that kind of chemical situation going on top of the emotional turbulence that was happening with Seven is a very volatile combination and is going to cause some type of reaction.
I guess we can both agree that it's really great that Seven even caught a break like that. Yeah, they had to deal with all that trauma from the first season and their whole life. Amnesia came as a blessing in disguise with weaning off the drug and working through that trauma even when they got their memories back.
Yeah, I agree. And I really liked how they had the Luther interaction with 7B, the first interaction that they had with their family again. It could have been turned into this awkward miscommunication thing, and it didn't get turned into that.
Yeah, it was definitely a good use of time. They really seized that opportunity, I feel.
For sure. And I liked the way that it felt authentic, how they ran into each other too.
Hmm.
It didn't feel like, oh yeah, okay, you're just trying to make these two people run into each other, which obviously they were. But at the same time, I could see it. With Seven having to go pick up Sissy's husband because he had a few too many and then he got thrown out of the bar where Luther was working as a bodyguard. And so Luther went to return the wallet to the husband when it fell out and saw Seven get into the car. And they had this really great moment where they like locked eyes. He was shocked, but they were just kind of like, why is this guy staring at me?
It's kind of cool how they set it up where Luther in season one, his whole thing is like he wants to be a hero and live up to what he was made to do, kind of like Diego in different ways, as we've discussed. But instead of trying to resolve that whole need to be a hero from season one with Luther, we get him resolving his personal connections and mistakes because, yes, he failed, quote unquote, failed to be a hero in the first season. But in the second season, he owns up to his failure towards his family with Seven. and
Yeah.
we get that character interaction instead of that want that he has of like, oh, I want to be a hero, because that want goes away. Like Five is the first one who runs into him. He goes to him first because he's like, he'll help me stop the apocalypse. And Luther's like, I don't care. I don't want to. I'm fine with my life here, working for Jack Ruby, the Jack Ruby, the guy who killed Lee Harvey Oswald, and being his bodyguard and fighting for him. I'm happy. He likes not having that expectation of being a hero anymore. It's not necessarily the life that he's given, it's more just that he isn't forced to be a hero. Speaking of, I find it a super interesting parallel of how at the beginning of season one, when Luther went to go find Diego at the gym, the guy running it was like, hey, like, you'd be great fighting in the ring, like, you're this big guy. And then at the beginning of season two, he's doing just that.
I didn't even put that together, but yeah, that is funny. I really liked how chill Luther was this season.
Yeah.
Just that scene where he's just sitting there eating at the table and Allison comes up and they just have that conversation and they just kind of talk about life and everything. And it just felt so chill and so freeing for him, which I think really opens up his character and makes him more likable. Because for me, I did not like Luther very much as a character in season one.
Hmm.
I really like his character growth in season two, and he's growing on me.
Yeah. I think I'm only ever liking these characters more and more with each season. I think it helps knowing that I came into it when the fourth one came out. So I'm like, these characters are not going to be good to begin with, you know? I'm over here ready to be forgiving. They're only going to get better for the most part, I assume.
But on to Allison. What were you about to say?
Oh yeah, it's still like Luther related, but I thought this was cool. It's another little symbolism moment. He finds out Allison is married, right? And he's goading his opponent in the ring until he's like flat on his ass and he's staring up at the sky at the moon through the window. And like the second that happened, my mind went to he misses it. Like he misses the moon, he misses the peace there. He almost regrets coming back down. And he had to because his dad died, but the expression on his face, like he was like, "Oh, why can't I still be up there and not be dealing with all these feelings?"
And the loop that her husband had just been thrown through because, like, he didn't think she had any siblings. And then all of a sudden, here come all these white brothers popping out of the woodwork. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine how that must have felt for like someone fighting in the civil rights movement, like really trying to work their way up. And then it's like, what? My wife has all these white men that could have helped us out.
all these, like, a white cult leader brother. When Klaus is like, we're family.
He was honestly mostly confused and confronted Allison about it later for
No,
both of these men.
but I really loved how he responded to Klaus and was like, "Well, we're all brothers in some way," like talking about like the earth as a whole.
Oh
And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
no,
It's like
you're married to my sister in just his like total Klaus way.
I love all these nuances that are brought into the Umbrella Academy story because of these race changes. Like, it just made a lot of sense for so many reasons. Like I said in the previous episode, how it didn't make any sense to me to pick up all these kids all over the world and then for them to all be the same race, especially seeing when they go back to the 60s, how you can have all these cultural and political messages and themes instead of just a fun romp in the 60s.
Yeah, it definitely made it more interesting to see the different facets of everybody's journey. And I am glad that they got separated. I think on my first watch there, I was like, ugh, they're all separated. But I did really like the way that they handled the separation because each character actually had a very developed arc in season two. I feel like they had more developed arcs than in season one.
I agree. It was definitely setting everything up in season one.
Yeah.
And I'm glad it kept going because it would have felt it would not have felt good if that got canceled. Like it felt like we didn't get anywhere. It felt like the very beginnings of a story, even by the end.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this in the previous episode or earlier in this episode, but it felt like they were in like a snow globe
Yes.
and there was like no outside world at all. And this one we get to see, in this season, we get to see the outside world and how it really influences the storyline. And I think that that just makes it better because there's only so much you can do inside a snow globe.
Hmm.
And I really do feel like season one was very much a snow globe. That's my new term. I don't know.
I like it. It works really well. And I mean, eventually by the end of this season or towards the end, Luther finally teams up with everyone. I really love seeing him team up with Five when they went to talk with Five from the past, who's also older than him, his older, younger version. That was a lot of fun. Luther was literally just like lost and dumb the whole time.
Well, it was funny because five is really good at manipulating. And so five is manipulating Luther on both sides. So Luther's like, that's a good point. But that's a good point. But wait a minute, that's a good point.
That actor is so good at just looking so lost. Like
Yeah.
something about the way he like his eyes and just like, I guess that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
it's good.
I liked how they added the nuance too of like how running into yourself in another timeline is going to cause problems. And like they showed all these like ridiculously funny turning into something serious symptoms of the
Hmm.
paradox. Because that's another thing. The problems would be solved too early if he could just go back in time and tell that version of himself that's about to travel forward to the future and go through all of season one exactly what to do and not do.
Hmm.
Time travel creates that because you could just like knock a storyline right on its ass.
Yeah.
But I did like how they kind of had that paradox there and then they also used it for some comedic relief.
Yeah, I liked it a lot too. In the comic books, they literally, the problem is just them bickering and not getting along with each other and like not believing that the other one actually is. Like it's that's it. You know, it's not I like these little extra things that help stand in their way. I
Yeah.
like that there's more stakes added because of these side effects. A fun fact, Luther and Five are actually twins in the comics, which is part of why in the comic book, Allison, she gets her voice back from the commission and she uses her voice she disguises herself as Jackie and then sits in the car to kill the president with her voice. That's how they successfully make sure that JFK is assassinated. And she does it because the commission threatens Allison to help because they'll go back in time and kill Luther and Five's mom because they're twins. And Allison ends up doing it not because she likes Five, but because she likes Luther. Because Five is honestly like a little shit in the comic books, and no one learns to like him. In the show, everyone's like, you know, learning to like each other and things like that. So that's a fun little thing that I wanted to mention from the comics. But I like all the changes they made in the show. Though I do feel like the pacing was kind of slow at first, but it paid off at the end.
Yeah, I feel like we didn't get to see a lot of power stuff until later on. I do kind of wish we had gotten, and this is funny coming from me, because Allison's not one of my favorite characters, but I do kind of wish we had gotten to see a little bit more of Allison's journey in getting her voice back.
Yeah, me too.
They just kind of show a couple of snippets of her, like not being able to talk. I kind of wish they had shown a little more about her ability to communicate prior to getting her
Yeah.
voice back and like I don't know. I think it would have been interesting to kind of see that, but then also you only have so much time.
Yeah. A little bit more on Luther. Yes, Luther kind of put the whole hero stuff behind him in this season, but it was funny to see how when the siblings do meet their dad, but like, you know, in the past, they go and meet him, and dad is just ruthless. Hargreaves is like, I don't even like kids. Kids are tools. They're not meant to be loved. He straight up tells Luther the stench of failure encircles you. Like this, like he's like, and he went to go tell this moment to Diego and Five. And Luther's like, well, at least he didn't shank my ass. And Diego's like, no, bro, he shanked your heart.
Yeah, I like that part too.
That got me. I really love their interactions this season. They were hilarious. Diego and Luther. They're like the two people that you put together and they share one brain cell. Like apart, they're fine. Together, it's like, no, no brain. Where'd it go?
They're just automatically little kids bickering over whose toy it is. But in reality, they weren't allowed to have toys as children, so whose weapon is it?
Whose weapon is it? Oh, that's not good.
Childhood trauma.
Yeah, like we're laughing. I'm just like, this is awful.
Well, they're fictional.
Yeah.
So
One of my favorite moments. No, you know what? I think I already mentioned it.
now I'm curious though.
Oh, it was the when Diego and Luther are trying to find out what Olga Foroga means when they write it down and
Yeah.
when the Swedes they kill Elliot and they write in blood because their other Swede brother was killed. Olga for Olga, which means blood for blood. They write it on the floor and they're like, oh my God, Olga for Olga? What's that mean? Is that a name? And Luther's like, we can look it up. And they just flip through the phone book immediately. It's like, there she is, Olga for Olga. And it's spelled a little differently, but they're just both very confused. And it's like, he was like, call the bitch. And, and they call her. And Luther's already like threatening on the phone. And then they find out that's not it. It's not a person. It means blood for blood. Like,
Sorry, wrong number.
yeah, yeah, that's exactly what happened. So good. I loved it. I want more of that in the entire show. That's all I want.
So, in terms of like how they had them in this alternate reality where there's no technology in the
Mhm.
time period that they come from, but when you were talking about them looking through the phone book, I was like, man, I don't even know if I got sent back in time if I would be like, oh, let me find a phone book to look this person up. I don't know that my brain would click with that. Like, yes, I grew up in the early 2000s with a phone book, but I don't know that like from being in today's mind space if I would be like, let me get a phone book.
That's a good point. I mean, they're lucky that they live in such a weird backwards time in the future where it's like there are probably still phone books.
Technology hasn't changed.
Yeah.
That's the 60s.
It's a long time. It's like Fallout where it's like, you know what's a good era? The 50s. Let's keep that up for a few decades.
I mean, maybe I would get there if I like was in the past and desperately needed something. I would be like, "Oh, phone books." But the way that they're just like, although they've been there for like a while.
Yeah, yeah, they
Yeah.
had been there for a few years by then, those two at least.
Just an errant thought that popped into my head while you were talking. That's
No,
all.
yeah, I don't know. I feel like I would do that. I never used a phone book, but we had an old one at our house and I would just flip through it.
But that is neither here nor there.
It
Just
is
my
there. It's back there in the past.
just my random thought for the day. I was like, phone books.
If I could find some old phone books, that would be like a good canvas. Like you could just use each one like as a sketchbook page and paint over it. That'd be
I
fun.
love that kind of art. Dictionary art.
Yes.
I love that. So, Allison?
Yeah, Allison.
I mean, we kind of have touched on a lot of Allison's plot line in talking about other characters.
Yeah, her story in general is very personal, related to civil rights movements, which we wouldn't have gotten this story if she hadn't been race changed. I'm glad that they weren't lazy about it too. Like they were like, "Hey, wait a minute, this is a black woman in the civil rights movement. We can't just let her be standing by. That would be really weird." I understand where people will make characters' story all about their race, which is something that we see a lot with authors these days, where if you're not a white author, people expect you to write stories about your culture. Like if you're black, it's like, okay, well, if you're gonna write a fantasy story about werewolves, they have to be from Africa. Or if you're Latino, it's like, oh, you want to write about witches? Well, they have to be brujas specifically. Like it's like that's been happening a lot, but I don't feel like that was the case with Allison because they integrated her voicelessness with the history of the civil rights movement pretty well because that is a time where women of color did not have voices.
And it was such a different change from her, too, from like who she was in her backstory, being able to get whatever she wanted just from opening her mouth and saying something. She grew up as like a prominent member of a famous family. She always had the world at her fingertips, and the juxtaposition of her going to this time when that wasn't the case.
She went from like very extreme privilege to none at all.
Yeah, that's something that it would have been nice to kind of like see the comparison of. We don't really see what racial relations are like in the alternate reality that they are from. But yeah, like we don't really know exactly what that looks like, but it's not presented as a problem for her. So hard to say because, like I said, season one is such a snow globe. Hard to really know what kind of difficulties she faced on that topic and then going to the past and facing these different set of difficulties. But I am really glad that they included that in the story because honestly, that's one of the most interesting parts of season two.
It is also an interesting wrench that's thrown into it all when she is also trying to come to terms with her powers and the ethical use of them after what happened at the end of season one, and how she realized what she did to Seven and was like, wait, and what she did to her own daughter. Allison was really considering the ethics of her powers, and now she's in a time where it would kind of be a good time to use it once you have it, but she still chooses to be civil and non-violent, just like everyone else. And part of that is not using her voice, which I'm kind of on the fence about whether or not I'm for that.
I also think that she was coming from a place of her relationship with her husband was the first authentic relationship she felt like she had ever had. I could see her having a fear of falling back on her power and using that to taint the relationship, like she did with her first husband and her daughter.
That's a good point because with her first husband, she did make him fall in love with her powers, and this one, she fell earnestly for him, which is kind of like the pass I give of like, wow, they married really fast. She was only there for a year, but it's her first genuine relationship, like through and through, because she didn't use her voice at all.
Yeah. So I think that that kind of contributes to her, and you do kind of see that when she uses her power to save him.
Hmm.
It's like, I have no idea what you could have said to that white cop to make him stop. He's finding out she has these brothers who are also white. I was kind of just like, when we first were introduced to Allison and her life in the 60s, I was kind of like, do we always have to have her revolve around a guy? Because in season one, you have her dealing with the turmoil of her ex-husband and the custody battle, and then everything going on with Luther. And so, like, her plot lines are always centered around a guy. But I've kind of come to terms with her relationship in season two, and basing her relationship in season two solely on that topic, I do like it, but I do kind of wish that they would pull away from that. So I'm hoping for them to pull away from that with her moving forward because
Yeah.
it would be nice to see her story not just revolve around a man.
That's a good point. She's always attached to a man in some way, and she really doesn't need to for her story. I think her story shines a lot more in season two as opposed to the first season. Like it feels less revolving around a man, but she still is. Like they put her with a man and they didn't really need to.
I could see that them not really needing to, but I also do really appreciate their relationship for what it is. Like I've thought about what season two would have looked like without her in that relationship. But I feel like their love story is a sweet love story.
Yeah. I feel like with the first season, we have Allison being like, can I live this life without using my voice? Can I live without that? And then that question is answered in season two, where she gets her first authentic relationship, not just romantically, but like literally with anyone, because she always used her voice. So she gets that and she's able to just live and have a good life without using her voice at all. And so there we go. Question answered. She can live her life without rumoring people using the I heard a rumor thing. So I think the next question for her, especially after she rumored that cop, is when is it okay to rumor people? I feel like the next season is going to be answering that question. She did use her power without hesitation during the fight at the end with Lila, though.
Yeah, but then Lila uses it right back on her.
Yeah, that backfired. But I mean, at least she didn't hesitate for once. It was bugging me that Allison had perfectly good moments to use her power in defense and then wouldn't.
I really did love Lila's power reveal. A lot of times writers fuck up on the reveals. And that for me, and I know for probably a lot of other people, the reveals are like a big thing for me. That's what I'm interested in. That's my favorite part when the shoe is dropped. So kudos for that.
Oh, I did really enjoy when Allison and Klaus reunited. I thought that was so great.
Yeah. And she's like, you started a cult.
Yeah.
It's just such a chill reunion. I really appreciated how quite a few of the reunions were just so chill.
Hmm.
And so just like, I mean, even Diego and Five, like it was a pretty chill reunion despite the fact that Five purposely kept him locked up in the asylum.
I think they all just know they're all a little bit fucked up.
Yeah.
And they're like, you know what? I get it.
Yeah.
I loved when Klaus and Allison reunited because Klaus is just chilling in his sugar mama's mansion that he inherited in the pool, and Allison just shows up and they hug in the pool, which I thought was so sweet. Like just instantly, like, Allison, and they hugged. I was like, oh. And then of course we get later on when the siblings are more reunited, but it's honestly not the best timing when they do this, but it's Allison, Klaus, and Seven. They're just hanging out at the barbershop where Allison works and talking. They're getting drunk and they're talking. And this moment where Klaus calls out Allison for incest with Luther. And she's like, technically, he's like, if you're saying technically, you're already in trouble. And then they have this whole cute little dance sequence. But that got me. That was great. I liked it being called out, but it's one of those things where just because a show or a book or whatever calls it out doesn't mean that it makes it better. You know, it's like, okay, you're aware, but like, what are you gonna do about it? Like,
The part that I like about that moment is she's like, we've never even kissed. Because
yeah,
automatically you're thrown back to the fact that they do have a kiss in season one, but then it's erased in the time reset. So I think that that's kind of like a refresher as to what their relationship actually is, because kind of hard to factor in like that didn't happen, like in terms of recapping the previous season, you know?
yeah,
Klaus is great. Probably another season where he's my favorite character.
yeah. He's going on strong, you know? And I just, I had such a hard time personally believing, like, cult leader? Okay, cool. I can believe that. In the 60s and not taking any drugs.
Yeah.
That was hard to believe. I understood that Klaus was trying to get clean, but it's the 60s. They thought of that with Allison. They were like, oh, it's the 60s. She's a black woman. She has no voice. Like, let's make this craft this interesting story. And then when Klaus was like, you know what? We want to keep him clean, so let's just make him a cult leader.
Well, one thing that I thought was great is that we see a little bit of the backstory of like how the cult was formed and stuff, but I like that we don't start off there. I like that we start off with him as a reluctant cult leader, trying to get away from his followers. Like he doesn't want these people following around. He doesn't want these people's love. Like he's like he full on tells somebody like get away from him and like go get a life, and they're like, "You're so smart, you're so wise." And he's like, just leave me alone. I really like that spin on it because I mean, cult stuff isn't typically something that's funny or fun to watch, like,
Right.
but the way that he is like running away from his followers and he's like, leave me alone, that kind of puts a new spin on it and makes it interesting and just oh so Klaus.
Yeah. I remember being very annoyed that he ended up being in the 60s the longest. Like they land in it's Klaus and Ben because Ben is always there, right? They land in the 1960s and the plot where they're all finally together doesn't start till 3 years later. So they're there the longest. And I was like, I don't know. Whenever it's my favorite character, I'm feeling for them immediately. So I'm like, oh, like they're gonna be stuck there the longest. That sucks. But without that, we wouldn't have had the story for him building up. Like I felt like they set it up well with the cult. We got the reluctant leader thing, as you said, and we have Klaus trying to prevent his Vietnam War boyfriend from going to the war.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I really did like the way they kind of like infused that and how the scene where he first runs into him at the diner, which I believe is the same diner that Allison staged the sit-in in, right?
Yes.
Where they first have that first run in, and then Dave kind of tracks him down and they have this conversation. And it's so interesting because there's so much tension between them, despite the fact that Dave really has no idea who Klaus is. Their relationship happens in what is now Klaus's past, but Dave's future, which like brings up all these time travel questions. Like when Dave first sees Klaus in what is now Klaus's past and Dave's future, is he going to recognize him? I love time travel romances for that reason. Like one person always met the person first in terms of the continuum and like their relationship. You see that their actions do affect the timeline in that, like in their version of the future present, season one, their future selves had not traveled back to the 60s because you can see that with Dave and his enlistment. He
Hmm.
enlisted early because of Klaus's interference.
Yes.
So you kind of see how that broke the timeline there. But yeah, I did like how they incorporated their relationship, and I liked that there was that tension between them, almost as if Dave could see Klaus as somebody that he could see himself with.
Yeah. And Dave wasn't even, I mean, it's the 60s. He definitely wasn't out of the closet. So to be confronted with Klaus in front of his own family, I think it was his uncle, like trying to push him away from the war, clearly queer around him, and just being like, what, who is this guy? Like, get rid of him.
Yeah.
Like, Dave is also younger because it's, the past and all that. So Klaus isn't trying to make advances on him because a little too young. It's weird. I really thought that we weren't gonna get more of that, but like you were saying, like the incorporation of it was, I felt like it was smart, and I felt like it was a good use of time as well, instead of just completely dropping it as this trauma that was foisted onto Klaus in the first season.
Yeah, it makes use of the whole Vietnam sequence for him because
Hmm.
if it hadn't really been included in season two, it would have just been like one of those things that it's like, oh, this happened because I wanted it to happen. It's cool. Like the monkey butler thing.
Yeah. In the comic books, when the Vietnam arc happens, it's pretty different. Klaus goes with both Luther and Diego. Like they're all three of them are trapped there, and Diego's loving it. He's like fighting vampires or something, and Luther it kind of becomes, yeah, it's like I guess they're vampires now. And Luther, he's kind of like hanging out in the woods a lot, really like kind of like he's a jungle man, kind of. Like that's what he's doing. And then growing out a beard, like that's Luther. And then Diego's fighting vampires, having the time of his life, ordering soldiers around and things like that. And then Klaus owns a strip club so that he can make enough money so that they can build a machine to get them back to where they need to go. Also gets a baby, and he leaves the baby in Vietnam with this lady. And I had to use like my phone to translate, like it was in Vietnamese, so I used my phone. And it was like asking to give the baby to the mom as he was handing the baby off to this little old lady. And they go into the machine to travel to where the Kennedy assassination was, because that's where Allison and Five were. So they were trying to get back there. Seven was in the present day. And so they go into the machine, and Luther's looking at Klaus like, is that your baby? Klaus is like, yeah, that's my baby. He's like, but I thought you were," and he's like, "I thought I was what?" They just play the gay thing as a joke, and it's like, okay. There were other little cool differences though, like I don't think they do this in the show, but Klaus's powers only work when he's barefoot, and he can also communicate through televisions and possess people.
Nope. Good. I'm good. I'm glad they didn't include that. Happy.
Yeah. I would think it'd be cool if he could possess people like a ghost though, or have ghosts possess him more often, because we do see Ben do that with him, and that's the first time we see it, which is cool.
Possession freaks me out,
I like to see actors play other characters.
but I'm surprised that it doesn't freak you out more because of the body thing.
I don't like bodies changing. Well,
Because they could just go out and get a tattoo.
yeah, I don't like that to an extent. I don't like it at all. Like, let's be real. Like, your consent of your body's gone.
Because, like,
Autonomy.
it didn't bother me in Supernatural. The TV show Supernatural doesn't bother me, but something about the way that they handle it in the Umbrella Academy, the possession gives me the, like, I think because it's like you see them like battling each other. I
Mm.
don't know. It was kind of like, no,
Yeah, it made it really seem like something was inside of him.
this is his body and he says no.
Yeah. But that all started because Ben felt so powerless and trapped the past 3 years, just kind of watching everything happen with Klaus and not even being able to also be around his family at the same time. Because he really missed his family. Like, Ben was actively missing everyone. He ended up falling for this girl that was one of Klaus's cult members, Jill, and Klaus let him possess him so that they could talk.
That was such a strange plot line. The fact that he had a crush on the girl, which I
Hmm.
get, But then he tries to possess Klaus and he wants to like be intimate with her. But then the fact that she's already slept with Klaus, I think it was like either a threesome or an orgy with Klaus. Ben didn't know that already. Like, what was Ben doing? He's not like he can talk to anybody else. I get not being in the room while Klaus is, but you would think he would have at least seen who Klaus was going off with.
I mean, does he ever like disappear or is he always, always present?
I have the impression that he's always, always present, but that could be a incorrect impression.
That's a good point, though. Like, even if he was, like, he would have to always be close in some way.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of cute though, because he was you need to know I'm a virgin, and then that's when he finds out that she slept with Klaus. And it's just like, because he died when he was 16.
Yeah.
But it was nice seeing him reunite with Diego.
Yeah, Ben was so sweet. His arc was so sweet and sad in season two. How he totally saved Seven and sacrificed himself.
Yeah, the authorities kidnapped Seven, and
Alphabet agencies.
yeah, one of those. Kidnapped Seven and put them on LSD, and then their powers started going out of whack. And Allison tried, Diego tried, Klaus tried, and then Ben was the only one who could walk through and make it work. And then he kind of wormed his way into Seven's body like a possession kind of situation, was able to get into their head, spend some time with them, and it was nice. He was able to heal Seven, especially as Seven was regaining their memories wholly. It wasn't as traumatic of an experience as it could have been because Ben was there. He asked for a hug as he was fading away, and he was gone for good. And I was very sad. He also asked Seven to take care of Klaus and help him when he's gone. It was like, oh, because Klaus is a mess.
Then at the end, you get different Ben.
Yeah.
In your
Yeah.
cliffhanger for the end of season two, they travel back forward in time to a completely different version of what should have been their present.
Hmm.
New students inside what is now the Sparrow Academy, and the only person they recognize other than their dad is Ben.
I feel like Dad purposely avoided adopting them. And he didn't see Ben, so he was like, oh, I'll take this one still. He didn't know that he was one of the original kids he had.
I thought it was interesting that he changed the name to Sparrow Academy.
It could have something to do with Harlan, because he had that little wooden sparrow at the end and still had some of Seven's powers. They could have linked up at some point. We could get an adult Harlan in season 3. I want to reincorporate Ben to the group. That's what I want for the next season because I did enjoy him.
It makes me a little sad that it's going to be a different Ben in season three, though.
Yeah, it's kind of like what they did with Guardians of the Galaxy, where like
Gamora.
Gamora, yeah, Gamora was dead, and then they brought in a new one, and it's that's not Gamora. Like it's just
Yeah.
not.
Like, you don't have the memories, you don't have the bond.
Hmm.
I would have liked it better if Klaus somehow manifested his powers to bring Ben back. But then also, how would that have changed things? And like to resurrect somebody from the dead, that's like, you know,
Also, like Ben wasn't leaving when he could have. He wanted to stay. That's what was making him. That was what was keeping him there. He felt like he needed to be there for Klaus and protect him, and he just wouldn't leave. Because soon after Ben's death, Klaus summoned him, and he's just been with him ever since. So it makes you think, why is Ben staying? Why couldn't Ben move on?
well, he said he was afraid
That's true. He did say that.
because he said that to make sure Klaus knew that it wasn't his fault that he stayed.
To clarify, I'm not saying that he thought it was his fault in terms of him staying, just
Yeah.
that part of it was him wanting to be there for his brother, and of course, he was scared, like he verbally said.
Yeah. But I am excited to see what other Ben is going to be like and all these other people.
What did you think about this season's moments as a whole? Like, do you have anything that stood out for you? I mean, I've already mentioned some, but I really enjoyed when they all came together and showed off their powers in front of the dad, and the dad was taking notes.
I actually do know because like I have said previously, season one and season two are rewatches for me.
Right.
Season one was very forgettable for me in the long run. in terms of going back and rewatching it. Like I remembered a lot of main plot points, but like Leonard, completely forgettable to me, forgot he was even a character. Season two stuck with me more. I
Hmm.
completely forgot all of the handler plot line. Like I knew she was in it because I remembered her relationship with Lila, but I didn't remember that she had so much screen time. The parts that really stick with me are a lot of the Diego and Lila moments. I really loved the evolution of their relationship and kind of what that looked like. Also, kind of Seven coming into their own and like really figuring out who they are as a character. The scene with the dad and Five and Diego, that wasn't something that like stuck out to me. The things that really stuck with me were like almost like the off-screen moments. The fact that Allison was dealing with coming to terms with being a part of the civil rights movement, that Klaus had kind of got this cult together, and kind of all these really interesting facets that I would have liked to have seen more of, were what stuck with me. Other than that, just the silly sibling moments, like when Elliot is like, "Are you an enemy of the people?" And they're like, "Well, I mean, really, that's a loaded question." And then they're kind of like riffing off each other like that. Those are the moments that like really stick with me. That and just like stupid zany things like yogurt. When does it know how to stop being milk?
One
Like,
moment I really liked with Lila was when she first meets Allison, and it's during the big fight, and Lila's like, "We haven't met. I'm Lila," and Allison says, "It's so nice to meet you." Punches her right across the face.
yeah,
I loved that.
I really like Lila. I think she added a lot of dimension to the cast.
I didn't appreciate her till towards the end because she was interesting at the beginning when I didn't know she was connected to the commission and handler. And then she was connected to the commission and handler, and it felt very unnecessary how much handler focus there was. That dragged down Lila's character, in my opinion, as a viewer. Then towards the end, she's like with the siblings, connecting with all of them, even in the fight, like that was fun. And I was like, this is good. This is what I want. And I think we're gonna keep getting more of that from Lila, which is the better stuff.
Yeah, I hope so. Because she's a very well liked character for me.
I do wish, though, that this season wasn't dealing with an apocalypse, but I have a really strong inkling that every freaking season is going to be apocalypse this, apocalypse that, time travel this, time travel that, because I want to see these characters, especially Five, not deal with an apocalypse because he's been doing that his whole life.
Yeah, it would be nice to kind of see something different, but I do think that you're right. I think that it's going to be a very central plot, almost like a Final Destination plot. You
Yeah.
can move it, but it's still going to happen. So it'll be interesting to see how they move forward with it.
I think another thing for me that I would have changed if they were going to have the handler be so prominent this season, I think it would have been best if she wasn't so black and white. She was very much a villain trying to manipulate Lila and everyone. Like we got that with the dad. It would have been a really interesting parallel as if we got someone who isn't completely a bad person, but their ideals so starkly contradict with the person they're trying to involve in their lives. Like it would have been interesting for Lila to go against the handler because yeah, she is plotting all these bad things, but like make her reasons make sense instead of just being an evil villain.
Yeah, and it also would have been better if she had had genuine feelings for Lila.
Yes.
Regardless of her original intentions, she did raise this child.
Yes.
Not a maternal bone in her body, just pulls the trigger and shoots her. It doesn't seem like she raised the child like Reginald Hargreaves raised his children. I don't even think that's something he would do. But she raised that child to at least have not just loyalty like we see with Luther and Hargreaves. Lila loves her mother to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
The character's not faceted enough to make that interesting. Yes, they're an antagonist, but they're almost like the secondary antagonist. Like it almost feels like the apocalypse itself is the main antagonist.
Yeah.
Like characters furthering it are the secondary antagonists. We spend a lot of time on this character, but we don't really get any backstory to make the character even a little bit relatable. Like, what was her life like before she joined the commission? Why did she go through such lengths to get Lila? Like, yeah, I understand that Lila's very powerful, but how did she know to choose Lila? Like, we spend so much time on this character, but we don't really get to see their motivations.
Yes.
Like, what is it
Yes.
that we're seeing?
Like she just wants to be the head of the commission, and that's really as far as we get, aside from also wanting to kill five.
But why? Your antagonist needs to be developed. And they did a good job with that with Leonard, I think. Leonard's backstory,
Hmm.
where he wanted to be a part of the Umbrella Academy in season one, really, went and you could see how, he made that turn. But you don't get that with the handler, even though we spend 2 seasons with the handler.
And I feel like that's the opportunity to, because we're not getting backstory, show her humanity, make her more relatable to the audience in some way or another, make us feel for her by having those little maternal instincts and reasons to make us understand why Lila cares for her, aside from, oh, you rescued me when my parents got shot.
You know who she reminds me of?
Hmm.
Mother Gothel.
I mean, yeah, Mother Gothel was a little better at manipulating, though.
What does it say about it that in a children's Disney movie, the character's better at manipulating?
I mean, you can find really good stories in the most unlikely places. Like a lot of people love prestige television, and you could see an amazing episode in a prestige show, and then you watch an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it just so happens to be better somehow. But it was a fun season. It makes me really excited for the next one. It's funny, the third volume of the comics ends on a very similar cliffhanger where they are introduced to the Sparrow Academy, except it's not an alternate universe. They kind of seem to exist in the same one. And there's no follow-up comic to the Sparrow Academy, so this will be the first time we'll be seeing the Sparrow Academy fleshed out. So when it comes to season two, Ava, what are you thinking coming from here and moving on to season three?
I really liked season two. I think I personally like season two better than season one for so many reasons. Like I said before, I like that we're not in the snow globe anymore. We have new characters introduced. It's so much broader. And I hope that we continue that into season three. I really like that these characters' worlds has gotten bigger, and I hope that it doesn't shrink moving forward into the future. I'm really excited to see how the characters keep developing because it's been really interesting character development, and I'm excited to see more.
Yeah, I'm there with you. I'm hoping we get to see more interactions, more character arcs being fleshed out, and more stakes and more challenges. And I'm curious to see what the apocalypse is going to be next, because I'm feeling, yeah, that's just going to keep happening. Strong feeling.
I'm excited to see what that cliffhanger at season two kind of fleshes into and how we're gonna see what these new Hargreaves children bring to the table and what that's gonna look like. I'm also really excited to see how Elliot's transition is handled on the screen because
I heard it was handled really well.
I'm really excited for that because I think that it can work really well for Seven's character. And I am really hopeful that they work it into Seven's character arc in a really great way.
I do want to touch more on the comics next episode, so I look forward to doing that. And yeah. You can keep up with Unpacking the Plot on Instagram and YouTube at Unpacking the Plot Pod, and you can listen to Unpacking the Plot wherever you listen to podcasts. That concludes this episode,
I'm Ava.
and I am Isa.
Thanks for unpacking the plot with us.
Bye!
Bye.